District 19. Senator Pearson, welcome to the coalition.
Thanks so much for having me.
First of all, I just want to start off the conversation. I do want to observe and offer my condolences to you and your family for the passing of your aunt, Senator Sandy Hanaway. I know that the two of you are very close. In a lot of ways, she was a mentor to you in your political career, and she left a lasting imprint, very strong presence to Hanaway and in Cumberland in particular, as well as across the state. So we just want to issue our condolences. That just happened a brief time ago, and want you to know our hearts are with you.
I appreciate that very, very much, and you're absolutely right. You know, she was an inspiration, and she was a really good guiding light, and someone that I could turn to often when considering issues, you know, locally or statewide, and just a wisdom that won't be able to be replaced. And so we miss her a lot, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. So let's get into the Ryan Pearson story right away. I mean, you come from a political family, a family that's very active in the business and political life of Cumberland, Rhode Island. You run for state senator. What are some of your motivations, and what are some of your desires, your beliefs, and what are some of the issues that you want to work on continually and continuing as a state senator?
Yeah, so sure. I mean, my first elected office was the Cumberland School Committee in Cumberland, and a little bit more background and potentially you may have asked, but you know, you may recall there was a bond campaign for Cumberland schools back in the 2005 and 2006 era to really modernize and update the Cumberland school facilities that were out of date and at risk of accreditation for NEACS, which is the accreditation agency for high schools. And at a young age then, as a high school student, really got involved in local politics and local issues, and we fought really hard and saw that project be approved by the voters, and it's really paid off in dividends today. Cumberland High School is, now bringing itself to be ranked as, again, one of the top, 5 schools in the state. So we're really, really proud of that. And what originally got me to run for the school committee was we had done that huge project, and I really wanted to be able to see it through. And really was excited for the opportunity to get elected to the school committee back in 2008. And from there, eventually running for the Senate. And, what really got me to run for the Senate was, as a local official, I quickly realized how many of the things on a day-to-day basis we were governed by on state law. And so things that we wanted to do or things that we wanted to change were largely driven by state law. And so that drove me a lot to say, hey, I've learned a lot here. Let me take that experience. And at the same time, I also looked at it from a perspective of, I believe that it's sort of my generation's time to begin to step up and to show leadership. And I'll be living in the state for many decades to come. And who has a bigger vested interest in the success of our state than someone like me? And so I put my hand up, and I was really, really excited for the opportunity to serve, and have enjoyed every minute of it. So I really, really appreciated it.
So what committees do you serve on currently?
So I serve on the Finance Committee in the Senate, which really is responsible for, our largest piece of legislation every year is the budget, obviously. And it's a really great opportunity. With the budget, you really get to review every single issue that comes before the state because most things cost money. And so the budget has been something that I've really spent a lot of time on. And my passion, and largely coming from the school committee background, has been education. So I serve in the Education Committee. And sort of the two biggest things that have continued to propel me and have been really important to me have been around, really looking at our education and workforce training. And I believe that's a big part of how we get to a better economy. And the second part is how does government continue to be a good steward and partner to business. And we've made a lot of progress there, a lot more to do. And that's really been my second thing that I really try to stay focused on throughout my time. And so those two committees have been very helpful and allowed me to do that.
Right. Now, of course, the Senate Finance Committee and the Rhode Island State Senate became, much more highly visible this year as a result of the controversy surrounding how the legislative session ended. Are you happy with the current budget? I mean, what do you see as the gains you've made, and what areas do you think still needs work?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, the budget is a $9 billion document, A lot of it is federal money and directed spends, right? So we're some of the pass through. And so when you really get into it, you're in a $3 to $4 billion range of what we call general revenue, to which the state can fund the state operations and make all the investments we need to make. And I think the budget does some good things, and I think a lot of the initiatives we've begun over the last several years, or particularly in our commerce department, have been very, very important to really reinvent Rhode Island. I think one of the biggest challenges we had in Rhode Island is as we saw, manufacturing industries and the jewelry industry in particular, and many of the old industries, and even financial services, right? I mean, you think about downtown Providence used to be, a financial center, and we had the skyscrapers, and each was a different major bank. We saw, those eaten up, and by Bank of America mostly, and moved to North Carolina. So we never reinvented Rhode Island from those old industries of the past. And so I think a lot of what we've been doing in commerce, and also around job training, the Real Jobs RI program, and things like that, are critically important, and that are continue to be supported in the budget. So I think there's a ton of those things. There's a lot of things across the health and human services playing field with the budget encompasses, and there was a lot that we worked there to make sure we preserved a lot of the services for the most needy. And so I think those are really great. Yeah, at the end of the day, this was the most difficult budget vote that I ever had to take. And I am still very, very concerned with the budget that we ended up with. I think we didn't address the major issues, and I think we created some major issues for the future. And so, I again had the privilege to serve as the Senate Finance Committee for this is my 5th year and my 5th budget, and it was a substantial challenge this year. And I think particularly concerning to me is, to balance the budget this year, we relied on a bunch of what we call scoops,
right?
Which is sort of a raid of savings accounts of a lot of quasi-public agencies like the, National Grid Energy Fund or the Health and Education Building Fund. And even this car tax proposal, which I'd love to talk to you more about, but we didn't find, it cost $25 million this year for the first year. We didn't find that. There's a $25 million line item cut in the budget that was used to pay for it. So, it was a very, very challenging budget. But I did believe at the end of the day we could not hold the state hostage. We were a month into the fiscal year without a budget, and we had to kind of move on. But I do think that those issues that brought us to that point have not gone away, and they will come back faster and stronger and more prevalent in January.
Now, let's talk about the scoops. We had folks, full disclosure, in studio from a variety of environmental groups, talking specifically, as you mentioned, about the scoop from the National Grid energy campaign, which is a direct. I'm a libertarian. Full disclosure, I think you know that. To us, it's a tax, and it's a tax on the unwilling. So you've got this sum of money, and a sore point to Rhode Islanders at these days are all these different sort of feel-good bills that were created. Let's take the high road tonight. Created with the best of intentions, and yet ultimately the money ends up going into the general fund. The lottery being the most famous example of that. This scoop out of this energy fund being the latest example of that. What do we have to do here?
That was one of the biggest issues that I had with this budget, and I can't agree with you more that that money was specifically set aside for energy efficiency programs, and it's really meant to be money back to taxpayers to encourage them to do energy efficient upgrades to their properties and to their businesses, and that's a really important policy statewide. And to your point, it's the right thing to do in many ways, and the absolute wrong thing is to scoop that money and have it be used to balance the general fund budget. It's not sustainable. And I would say this, every year that I've been in the Senate, the governor has started off their budget using the scoops. And, to kind of get into some of the minutia, the governor has to use the revenues from the November Revenue Conference to build their budget. And when they're short money, they go to these scoops from all these quasi-public agencies, and they scoop the money from them to be able to spend more than what the revenue estimates were there. And I understand that, in almost every year actually, since I've been lucky enough to be on the finance committee, that we've actually had more revenues from the May conference than was available in November. And our number one rule for every year prior to this year, and I credit President Pai to lead a lot with this, her number one rule in the budget was we always put the scoops back first before we did anything else. We never talked about anything else until the scoops went back. And the ideology behind that was twofold. One, exactly to your point around that these monies were intended for one specific purpose and they should remain intended for that. And two, that we've seen, these savings, in I should call them savings accounts, but reserve accounts and surpluses of these agencies, that if the state ever had a tap into them, that was the last resort before hitting the rainy day fund in a really bad economy. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to preserve them for those two reasons. And unfortunately, this year, that logic just did not prevail among my colleagues. And so I've certainly, made that known within the chamber, and also throughout the budget process was highlighting that. But I think we've got a lot of work to do to improve the budget process as a whole, because that's something that we should have been addressing a lot sooner than we decided to.
Yeah, because there's and I don't have to tell you this because I'm sure you feel the wrath of the constituents. You're on the front line, if you will, the bleeding edge of our political system. There's a sense of cynicism that is reinforced here in the state. It can emanate from a failed program like 38 Studios, but it's reinforced when you have these funds being taken out sort of at will, and without a lot of transparency to the taxpayer. So you find an element now where people shrug their shoulders and are just disgusted. And I think this energy, this reassignment of these energy funds for a lot of people may have been the final straw with regard to actually believing what government tells them. There's a credibility gap here that exists, fairly or unfairly. It simply exists between what the average taxpayer believes and what they're led to believe. And so is there a way on a legal, whether it be legislation to enable this? Because take this one step forward to the tolls, and it's not hard to empathize with folks' natural reaction that we start the tolls and legally they're limited towards trucks, but we all know that laws can be changed. There's nothing cast in stone to then move them ultimately, repurposing that same infrastructure so that civilians' automobiles are being tolled. Do you have words of comfort for the people of District 19?
Yeah, what I would say is this. I would say I 100% understand it, and you're absolutely right. I hear from residents of Cumberland and Lincoln all the time, and I think to your point exactly around when something like these national grid funds are used, and I would agree, inappropriately, that causes the cynicism, and I think you're 100% right, and I think that there's no one's fault for that besides those of us in the General Assembly. I'll give you a good example, right? And so the Rhode Island Health and Education Building Corporation issues tax-exempt bonds that we allow schools, colleges, universities, hospitals to do their bonding for facilities. There's a fee charged in those bonds that is paid for by the issuer, and that fee goes into RIBEC, and RIBEC uses that to fund their operating costs, but also builds up these reserves. Right. One of the really smart things we were able to do over the last several years, and one of the things that I sponsored in my first couple of years in the legislature, was the state had completely stopped assisting with fixing, renovating, and building new schools. And one of the best things we did with those reserves was we utilized those reserves to actually help us be able to build schools and reinvigorate the state program again. And that was a scoop, but it was a scoop that was done with revenues received from bonding for school construction that have no purpose besides building reserve, and we used it to further catalyze school construction, right? And so, to me, it was absolutely the right thing to do, and we were able to restart actually having the state fix schools again, and obviously there's a lot of great reasons around why we do that. So that's the right thing. To your point, though, around, where we're at, any legislature can decide to do what it wants when it wants to do, right? And that's, short of any constitutional provision, we put a lot of controls in the legislature, in bills and in things as we build them. But that never prevents the future legislature from changing it, right? And so what I would say, though, and we've done a lot of work on this over the last several years, has been really making sure that all of the funds collected at DMV and through, anything that's really rated on traffic goes actually to road and bridge maintenance. And we've worked very hard to do that, and my intent is to absolutely make sure that continues, and that's what I will support. But at the end of the day, the only thing that really does that is, we need to have senators who have that same belief as me, and reps who have that same belief as me, and the taxpayers need to let them know that they want the money used for what they were intended to be used for, and hold their feet to the fire if they don't.
Right.
And that's really the only controls that we have, right? And that's part of the democracy we live in. But I believe that at the higher levels that most of these things end up. But it's when we break sort of these rules in these smaller circumstances that I think breeds the largest cynicism, which I absolutely understand. And I don't think we should do. But we just have to keep holding everyone accountable to that.
Do you think it's time for Rhode Island to embrace, at some level, voter initiative?
We could. I worry about it a bit, largely because of some of the propositions that we've seen in states that, you end up getting to a perspective of, you can have well-financed, backed campaigns that come in with a specific agenda that promote a specific view, and, say the counter organization on the other side doesn't have the resources to compete. That's what really worries me about that, is that, as a legislator, lobbyists lobby all the time, and there's a lot of really high-powered interests that have very, highly paid lobbyists to push their agenda and get studies and spin facts in their own way.
Right.
But it's my job to sift through that and understand from, the advocate that comes in that represents, a school district, for instance, or the school committee association is a good one, who they're really experts in what they do, and but they don't have the resources of some other agencies. So I think it's certainly worth the debate, but I think the risks are also very high in that, particularly in how money flows through politics at this point in time, that we could make it worse than it is better.
Now, my words, not yours. You alluded to what I'll call unfunded mandates earlier in our conversation. Yeah. I believe it's Mr. Beardsley from the League of Cities and Towns here in Rhode Island. He and his organization have advocated on and off for a number of years for what they call their toolkit, which is legislation which allows them to deal head on with these unfunded mandates. Is it time for the state of Rhode Island? And this is a double-edged sword, by the way, because there is a significant amount of money at stake when it comes to the aids to city and towns. But is it time for the state of Rhode Island to start stepping back from the municipal affairs of cities like Providence, Central Falls, or even Cumberland or Exeter, East Greenwich, where you've got this micromanagement that occurs, you've got these transfer payments going back and forth, you've got a dependency in cities like Providence, Pawtucket. And I understand there are special challenges in urban areas, or particularly in a city like Providence, for which so much land is not taxable or not effectively taxable. Right. Yeah. But is it time for states, government, and city and town governments to start operating at an arm's length basis?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this. I stay in very close contact with both, Mayor Murray and the Cumberland Council, and Administrator Alman, and the Lincoln Council, and all my school committees. And when something gets in their way, they're not shy about bringing it to my attention. And 9 times out of 10, the issue can actually be handled administratively. And so there may be, the state is mandating that the town or the school department do one thing or another. But when you get into it, there's some regulatory flexibility where the director of, say, the Department of Ed or Department of Environmental Management has some administrative authority And so typically we are able to go to that, executive and see the case, and 9 times out of 10 we don't have that big of an issue. Or sometimes, we do need to do legislation to change a statute or to move something that's outdated. And so I think, sort of answering part one of your question, I think that, as those things are brought up by the cities or towns, we actively try to work on them. And make sure that, we're just being smart, right? I mean, there are some things that the state does say, hey, we should do this, that makes sense. And some of the cities and towns would agree with that. But I think, at the end of the day, I think, for a town like Cumberland, Cumberland does operate relatively independent of the state.
Right.
And, someone had asked me, as the budget impasse was going on, how was it impacting Cumberland? And, was my mayor really concerned about not receiving, the various state aid payments? And I somewhat chuckled because, Cumberland receives education aid, but we don't receive pilot money like Providence. We don't receive distressed community aid like Providence. We don't have other pass-throughs like other cities and towns do. So at least for the communities that I represent, I think that they do operate in a relatively, arm's length basis, so to speak. I think to your larger question, though, around Providence and Pawtucket and et cetera, quite honestly, they depend on the state for quite a lot. And not only in a revenue perspective, but also in a lot of administrative support and sort of strategic analysis that a lot of the State Department agencies do, particularly for the city of Providence. And so, I think at the end of the day, I think, we have duly elected executives of the state and of the city or town. And, certainly if one of the other things that, one's getting in the way of the other, raise their hand and call your senator or rep. But I think, and a large portion of it, many of the mayors or administrators, do rely on the state for a lot of things, and I think they're okay with that.
Well, and because here's the frustration. It's interesting. A few years ago on the Dan York Show on WPRO, by sheer coincidence, the mayor of North Providence was followed immediately after by someone who I lovingly refer to as Mayor McCheese. Of course, that's Dan McKee of the great city of Cumberland, who overall I believe is an administrator. He and I disagree on certain political issues, obviously, but as an administrator, I believe the town of Cumberland, and it's hard for me to say, as a Lincoln Chafee once called me, a nattering nabob of negativity, or as Joe Trillo likes to refer to me as Dr. Doom. But it's hard for me to say, but the town of Cumberland in a lot of ways is very, very well run. And so what was striking was, again, pure coincidence, the mayor of North Providence was talking about the size of his workforce, and Dan McKee came on for a few minutes later, and York asked him, just almost as an aside, how many people work for the town of Cumberland, and on a per capita basis, it was a fraction of North Providence, and yet at the same time, I think the people who do the hard work of municipal government, the people who do the roads, the people who the police and all that, do a remarkably good job on very little money. Now, that's admirable when it's the town you live in. When you see cities like Providence, and again, feel free to correct me, but like Providence, and I can't remember the last time I heard any sort of announcement, any sort of movement towards downsizing government or introducing efficiencies. It strikes me that when you have this state aid, it's sort of like your the gambling son. And again, I understand the challenges of running a city. You have different costs than you do in a bedroom community like Cumberland. But there doesn't seem to be any incentive whatsoever towards fiscal responsibility in Providence. It's so, as someone who lives in the burbs, it's frustrating.
Yeah, I think you're on to a good point there, and I'll share two examples with you. And I'll talk about this latest motor vehicle tax, and then also talk about education spending. And I think they're very representative of a large portion of the municipal budgets. And when you take a look at the motor vehicle tax, right, there are very different rates by community, and that's not just by motor vehicles; it's also on real estate and tangibles, et cetera. And you see a community like Cumberland who has a tax rate, in fractions of that of a city like Providence or a city like Pawtucket, or even other suburban communities. I mean, Cumberland's car tax rate is, again, a fraction of what Barrington's car tax rate is. And so I think at the end of the day, what you have is every city and town has to just determine their own taxing structure that drives the revenue that they are able to have, which drives the expenses that they're going to be able to also have. And I think you're 100% right that Cumberland has been a very well financially managed town. It's been very conservative. It's run its community very, very lean. I think that's, we've let ourselves into a few places in Cumberland where I think we're now in a place locally, and I think the mayor and the council are working hard at that at some places where we push back, even underfunded certain areas, and they're working on that, but they're doing it, I think, in a methodical way. What you basically have here, though, is, and this is why when I sort of brought up that this budget, the state budget, was one of the hardest budgets I ever had to vote for, and the biggest issue is really this motor vehicle tax cut. And while it sounds great on the surface that everyone's getting a motor vehicle tax cut, the hidden sort of piece to this is that at the end of the day, once this over $220 million tax cut is phased in, Cumberland's share of the pie is around, I think, $5 million, give or take. And Pawtucket, who has the same valuation of cars, right? So has the same amount of value of vehicles in their city, is getting $15 million, while Cumberland gets $5. And the whole reason behind that is that Pawtucket taxes more for their cars because their budget's bigger and they have a bigger government. And that, to me, is not fair. And particularly as someone who represents Cumberland and Lincoln, we're doing two things. We're not making the tax really fair across communities, and we're also not doing anything to encourage these cities or towns to control their belts. And, and that, as a state policymaker, is particularly of concern to me, that I don't want to be the one that just continues to take these wheelbarrows of cash and dump them off at, various cities and towns across the state without also holding them accountable for making sure that their communities are also run lean. And if they want to spend more, that's fine, but they shouldn't expect more from the state to do that.
And that seems to be almost the assumption at this point. They operate under the assumption that, and particularly Providence, I think Mayor Grebe and he and I disagree strongly on the stadium initiative, but I've had the opportunity, and he's been on the show, Mayor Grebe, and I think he's done some remarkable things in Pawtucket. And what's interesting to me is, and again, feel free to challenge me on this, but it would appear that whatever growth is happening in Pawtucket organically as a result of its newfound status as the brewery capital of central New England is largely due to regulation cuts aimed at encouraging said business, not financial giveaways. They simply made it more attractive to be there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. That's not to say that the breweries haven't testified before me have some financial tax breaks they need to be even more successful. But you're absolutely right. A lot of it is also the regulatory environment. And I think, for better or for worse, particularly in the liquor space, Rhode Island has a very outdated liquor, regulation rule set that dates back to the blue laws. And we've been chipping away at them. I think we could do more, and we certainly should do more there. But that's literally one example of one industry, and I think it breeds to a larger issue. And I had the opportunity to serve on what's called the Special Legislation Committee in my first term in the Senate, who deals with the liquor industry regulations. And certainly there were things that came before us, and I was like, well, why wouldn't we do that? That just makes sense. It's good for business. Let's move on. And there's forces that don't agree with that. But I got to learn a lot about the liquor industry and the rules and whatnot, which was a good learning experience. But at the end of the day, what I've said to so many business owners every time I meet them, or I'm in Cumberland or visiting a business, I tell these business owners all the time, when you have a problem or you have a regulation or you have a law that's making you do something, and you just legitimately don't think it makes sense, and you think it might be outdated, I need you to tell me. Because, I am not going to know every law or regulation that gets in the way, whether it be a brewery or an auto repair shop or a manufacturer or there's a conference management business in Cumberland. That they've all brought these things to me over time. And I would never know to try to go after these things or fix them if they weren't brought to me by business owners and constituents. And so, So I think all I can say there is you're absolutely right that part of it is the regulatory environment, but we also need your help more broadly to help us identify what are those things we're going to go after. Because once we know what they are, we'll go after them. I even sent after my first election, I sent a letter to every business in my district saying, please tell me the things you want me to get rid of. I got a few responses, but not nearly as many as I was hoping. So I continue to ask people all the time, please tell us what you need from us to get those businesses going.
Right. It's important for folks not to just kick back and complain, as I look myself in the mirror, but to advocate for change in a responsible yet aggressive manner. In any government setting, the squeaky wheel will be heard.
Yeah. 100%, and you might know Bill Casillas, who owns Angelo's and runs that business here in Cumberland. I'll tell you, and he won't mind me saying, which is why I can bring him up, but he is always advocating not only for his own business but for the hospitality business as a whole. And when there's something that's coming up, not only is he reaching out to me, he's putting me in a group chat, group text message or a group email with every restaurant owner that he knows in Cumberland, so they all can let me know too, right? And I think that's exactly the kind of sort of leadership and advocacy that I think anybody should feel free to step up for and really go after it. I mean, D&B Manufacturing, the entire family who runs that in Cumberland, they've been very vocal around what are the things they need. And so I think, there are real people and real businesses that, run in Rhode Island and absolutely step up, advocate, and that's the only way to move the needle in the direction that they want to see it.
I'm going to take a very quick break to bring people up to speed where we are, but I want you to hold that thought about the hospitality and entertainment business in Cumberland, because that's going to play strongly in our next conversation. Folks, if you're just tuning in, you are in fact listening to the Coalition Talk Radio, outrage, porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at Go Local Live at their state-of-the-art broadcasting center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the city we love, the Naked City, La Prove, Providence, Rhode Island. The city of 1,000 stories. Tonight we're telling a few. Joining me via phone is Senator Ryan Pearson, Democrat of Cumberland, Senate District 19. He graciously reached out to me. We had been kind of chatting at each other through a couple of different people about issues du jour, and he has agreed to just really get down to it, as we've already done in the first few minutes. Folks, of course, we are at coalitionradio.us, facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and as always, our apolitical, anti-crony capitalist, anti-Pawsox Stadium feed at Pawtucket is Home. So, Senator Pearson, of course, as I mentioned when we were sort of chatting offline in the run-up to you joining me tonight, the elephant in the room for me is the taxpayer subsidies to the proposed Pawtucket Red Sox Stadium. For folks who might be listening to us for the first time, full disclosure, I am chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party, and the Libertarian Party actually coalesced, if you will, under I'll call it the stimulus of what we refer to as 38 Special, of course, 38 Studios. And then one of the issues that brought us together, a group of different people from different backgrounds, was, of course, the first protracted fight against what was supposed to have been the Providence Red Sox Stadium, here just a few short blocks away from the Go Local Live Media Center. We were successful by engaging with a coalition of organizations. David Norton was on the show a few weeks ago. Folks across Providence joined together and successfully put that one to bed. We are about to re-engage over the next few weeks, and the quite frankly, ground zero of that battle will occur in Senator Pearson's Senate Finance Committee, as his Senate Finance Chairman has offered to sort of take the show on the road, if you will, Bob Hope style, and bring it across the cities and towns. I see this as an opportunity. I'm going to look at Mr. Connolly's efforts and take the high road and accept them as an opportunity for genuine discussion, as opposed to 2 years ago's little roadshow, which was they dubbed the listening tour. What wasn't clear until we started the listening tour that us taxpayers were supposed to do the listening and the Pawtucket Red Sox were going to do the talking. Long wind up to a couple of quick questions. It is my contention, and for the record, I have formally asked the City Council Chair in the town of Cumberland to propose a resolution opposing the use of taxpayer money to support the Pawtucket Red Sox Stadium. It is my contention, on using basically fundamental economics, that if in fact this project were to go forward, the town of Cumberland would find themselves surrounded by the two biggest taxpayer-subsidized entertainment monopolies in the state. Of course, that is Twin River in Lincoln, and now this would be, of course, the Pawtucket Red Sox Stadium, the stadium at Slater Mill, over here in the bucket. Both taxpayer-subsidized in a variety of ways. The folks at the Paw Sox will argue that these are not taxpayer subsidies. I would argue that any financial arrangement which, shall we say, prevents private enterprise from having to enter the dreaded private capital markets is in fact a subsidy. So you talk about the hospitality business. Economics 101. In any given economy, there is a finite amount of disposable income. Folks who are listening, regular listeners to my show or my appearances on the Lively Experiment or testifying before the State House will have heard this mantra 1,000 times. But there is that finite amount of capital available for entertainment spending. To the degree with which this stadium is built and dropped, if you will, like an economic bomb in the middle of Pawtucket, that will, particularly in its early years, when any new business is a novelty, draw funds away from being spent in a town like Cumberland, which again is surrounded, if you will, by state-sponsored edifices. We're going to keep it clean. Senator Pearson, are you concerned at all, or do you think that businesses in Cumberland are aware of the threat that this poses on an economic level, particularly given the fact that the ownership of the current ownership, if you will, the Pawtucket Red Sox, have taken this, what was initially a stadium, and proposed to make it a year-round entertainment facility? Do you think they're cognizant of that threat?
Well, I mean, I would start off by saying I think their first proposal was crazy, and I'll give you a short sort of behind-the-scenes snippet that I think you might find interesting. Mm-hmm. The first time that I was aware of the Paw Sox's proposed financing of their original, Providence Stadium, et cetera, I was literally about to take my seat before a hearing began in the Senate Finance Committee, and I leaned over. I saw the feed come up on Twitter from Providence Journal, and I clicked on the link to read the story. And I couldn't believe what they were proposing. And I leaned over to Chairman Dan DuPont, Senator DuPont of East Providence of the committee at the time, and leaned over to him and I showed him the document. And well, I don't think you'll mind me saying it, but his reaction was, good luck in Worcester. Between my initial reaction and the Senate Finance Committee Chairman's initial reaction, as much as it got played out in the media, I think it was sufficiently dead on arrival in that first moment. With that said, I think that the team has learned substantially from their mistakes in the past, and look, I grew up as a kid going to baseball games, and the Paw Sox certainly was one of them, and the McCoy cookouts in the summer I would go to, and it's certainly a major piece of the fabric of Pawtucket and the economy of Pawtucket, and of the Blackstone Valley, right? I mean, I think, I for one certainly, I was very happy when the Patriots got their two new jets, and they're going to be flying out of Pier Green. I was excited for that. And I'm also excited that, Rhode Island has a piece of the New England sports, right? I mean, we've got the Providence Bruins. Foxborough is really closer to Providence than Boston. And certainly we have the Pawtucket Red Sox as the affiliate of Boston. So, I think that, these are decades old and generations old relationships that I think everybody wants to keep. But to your point around, listen, there is a finite amount of revenue and a finite amount of expense that can be done here, and certainly a finite amount of demand. And at the end of the day, you mentioned Twin River as well. Twin River, I believe, again, off the top of my head, is the third largest revenue-generating stream of Rhode Island, which, take that for what it's worth, it's very concerning that we rely on gambling for that much of our revenue, but it is a substantial stream of revenue for the state. And it's the Paw Sox we derive revenue from the Paw Sox as well. And so they derive tax revenue either through property tax or, sales tax or other use taxes. And so at the end of the day, a pure loss, if the Paw Sox did decide to leave Rhode Island would be a negative to the Rhode Island economy. And so,
But let me jump in and challenge you on that assertion. So let's engage a little back and forth. And again, if you're just joining me, Senator Ryan Pearson, District 19, is joining the coalition live via phone. He was originally going to join us in studio, but got held up outside the city. There's some pretty crazy traffic out there tonight, so I appreciate him taking time on a Friday night to join us. By the way, this segment is, for the first time, sponsored by Air Sciences, airsciences.net. Mold remediation, duct cleaning, environmental hazards, covering all of the East Bay into Massachusetts and across Rhode Island. They make your home livable, safe for your family, your friends. They specialize in medical interventions, if you will, when folks are suffering. Folks, anyone who's willing to testify, to support, to embrace independent media deserves an opportunity for your business support. So, folks, go to airsciences.net. They'll do the job. They'll make your home a home. If, in fact, the Paw Sox revenue went away, we and in the run-up to this show, unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to send you this tape, and I'll certainly forward it to your attention. First off, there are other baseball leagues who are offering and have offered on this show to take the place of the Pawtucket Red Sox. The other issue is that disposable income will simply not stop being spent; it will be spent elsewhere. We had Victor Matheson from the College of the Holy Cross on a month or so ago. He actually testified to the notion that if, in fact, the Paw Sox were to go away, given the notion that most of that money derived from that they actually take out of the local economy, and if you will, it's sort of a small form of capital flight, that if, in fact, the money was spent on local businesses instead, as well as a more localized version of that baseball league, and we had the Futures Collegiate Baseball League on the air, who have openly offered to come to McCoy should the Paw Sox leave. They operate a very successful franchise in Worcester. I challenge the assertion that there will be any loss whatsoever to the Rhode Island economy from an organization that pays little or no rent, pays taxes based on a level of economic activity that is replaceable. I'm trying desperately here, not just in this conversation, but across the state, to provide a level of fundamental economics, I'll call it an economics intervention. There's no proof whatsoever that we'll lose anything economically if they go away. Spiritually, are we all have an emotional connection to the Paw Sox? Of course. A lot of that, I would argue, in terms of goodwill, has evaporated over the last 2 years because, my words, not yours, their crazy attempt to hold the state of Rhode Island, well, quite frankly, economic hostage. So, if the Paw Sox go away, and I don't want them to, I'm a baseball fan. I'll watch a baseball game for a football game or hockey match anytime. But if they go away, quite frankly, I'm not even convinced most people care anymore. I mean,
yeah. Well, let me tell you my barometer and how I'm walking into the experience that we're going to be having, right?
Right.
So, I think it is good that we are going to look at this issue as part of some fall hearings because it'll give clarity to the issue. And something like this, obviously, it's a substantial decision as well as something of a lot of public interest. And so I think it's great that we are going to do this throughout the fall because, through the middle of session, it would be one of 100 issues, whereas in the fall, it'll be one of one issue. And so I think that's great, and I think the attention is important. I think, President Ruggiero made the right call this year when he said, listen, we're not going to consider it as part of a regular session, we'll look at it in the fall. And I agree with him on that, and for exactly the reasons I was just saying. The barometer that I'm looking at this, and I have zero opinion walking into it, but the barometer that I'm looking at is the Paw Sox and, the Commerce Department, who did a lot of work on this, and quite frankly, I'll be asking the Department of Revenue Analysis, which is sort of our in-house economist within the Department of Revenue for the state, to really answer some fundamental questions. And the questions really for me are going to be, first of all, tell me what your plan is, right? And what are you going to do, and why are you going to do it, and what timeline, and how are you going to market it, where are you going to get the ticket holders and whatnot. I mean, a friend of mine was at a Paw Sox game, last week and texted me, in the evening, and, probably 10% of the seating was full. So, there's a lot of valid questions to answer. And, my basic barometer walking into this is there a demonstrable benefit that they can prove and that can be backed up through economic study and common sense, right? And, through people like yourself who have that kind of background. And, I was lucky enough for my degree to be in finance. To really look at this and say, are we going to see a true demonstrable benefit? And whatever, at the end of the day, my barometer is, if there's going to be some sort of arrangement or a deal, it has to be financially beneficial to the state, period. And if the state's going to take the same amount of money or lose money, I'm not sure that makes much sense for exactly the reasons that you've outlined. But if they have a way that they can show me the economics of how that's different, then I'm open to it, right? But I'm also open to the same fact that the economics just might not be there. And to your point, it just might be time to let it play out, of course.
Right.
But I think we owe the issue the full vetting and the full analysis, and I think we'll be able to do that.
No, absolutely. I mean, the other fear, of course, is that we, and for a lot of us, 38 Studios was a defining moment. There are those in government who would like to diminish that, who would like to poo-poo that, who would like to dismiss that. But it is and always will be, for our lifetime, a defining moment.
Let me be as blunt as I can. It was one of the dumbest financial deals you could ever do, right? When you have a bunch of private equity investors saying, no, we don't want this deal, when you have the state of Massachusetts, who quite frankly has been out there more in the space of offering financial deals to lure companies say no, there's a reason, right? And I think it was pushed through. It was Governor Cartier at the time, and the legislature at the time pushed it through.
Right.
As some sort of a silver bullet panacea that was going to save the Rhode Island economy. And that's not going to work. We started the show talking about, we really need to be focusing on, job training and skill building and getting the workforce that we need and rebuilding and reinventing the Rhode Island economy. That's not going to happen through one company.
Right.
And that was a major snafu. And, put it this way, Rhode Island may, in hindsight, try to look at the glass half full side of this. Rhode Island may be a much smarter and cautious state because of that deal. We got burned once, and I think everyone's keen on not getting burned again. And I think, that may be helpful in a bunch of other deals that maybe wouldn't have attracted, the notoriety that 38 Studios did.
Right.
But we live and we learn.
Well, it's my mantra at the time, because I became, I call it radicalized. A friend of mine decided the other day that I became weaponized. Because the morning it happened, I called Governor Cartier's office and kind of, went off the deep end a little bit, because what I saw is the sheer stupidity of the deal. Everyone at the time was in the bag for it, including a lot of people who now pretend they weren't, or pretend that they were fooled. And my mantra at the time, because I got so little time in the media, was no personal guarantee, no equity, no board seat, no future. Now, when I project and get away from the emotionalism attached to 38 Studios, and I look at this stadium deal, we're being asked effectively to issue bonds or issue debt in some form by a quasi-governmental agency in what I believe is a blatant attempt to once again sidestep voter approval. And then in this case, you're looking towards this Pawtucket redevelopment, whatever authority, whatever alphabet soup they're using this week. And again, there will, under the current program, there will be no voter, because quite frankly, I believe the voters would crucify this, given the opportunity to vote on it. You're literally, in its current incarnation, according to some, you're talking about Pawtucket essentially collateralizing this in debt with their state aid. Now, take our first conversation, when you and I have some common ground on some of the issues surrounding state aid. Now we're going to have literally a city that's, and not at the fault of the current administration. The current administration inherited a mess. I think they've made some noble efforts to clean it up. I believe the good mayor of Pawtucket's heart is ultimately in the right place. But you're going to collateralize that debt with state aid that they need because their schools are literally crumbling? Yikes! And on top of that, to your own point, there's plenty. You work in the financial industry during your day job, and all credit to you because you work in what I call the dreaded private sector. You work in a very real world. You know as well as I that, and I believe the term du jour last year was dry tinder. And dry tinder is the term Wall Street uses for available capital markets, which are, quite frankly, given the low interest rates, are desperately looking for high rate of return investment. So if in fact this investment, as is the litmus test we now apply to 38 studio type investments, is whether or not it's financeable by the private equity markets, if it's not, then I believe the lesson learned from 38 Studios is even more severe. Take on top of that, and I'll get off my high horse here in a second, but take on top of the fact that the people involved, the ownership group of the Pawtucket Red Sox, are some of the most successful, most sophisticated investors of my generation. I mean, you're talking about the former chairman of CVS, who I believe in his last year and by the way, I'm a capitalist, so I'm not the eat the rich crowd here. He made $62 million. You're talking about Terry Murray, who engineered or orchestrated the acquisition of Fleet Bank by Bank of America. So you're talking about some of the most successful capitalists in the world. I believe Go Local Prop, Katie Nagel here, pointed out quite adroitly that if you took the combined net worth of the Paw Sox ownership group, they would be the 10th most wealthiest, bad English there, the 10th wealthiest in sports ownership group in the world. So if all of this stuff we learn from 38 Studios, we can't apply to this situation, I'm gonna agree to disagree. I don't know how far we've come or learned because, and again, I'm a libertarian. I certainly won't apologize for it, but I believe that government has absolutely no place whatsoever interfering in private markets. If the investment stands, if the investment is going to make money, congratulations. Nothing would make me happier than seeing them build their own stadium and making a bloody fortune. I hope they make $1 billion, and if that means competing against Cumberland restaurants, they did it with their own sweat equity, with their own risk capital. That's the free market at work. But if they're going to do that, and imagine this, Senator Pearson, you've got a very real possibility, if this goes forward, that, you spoke to a gentleman, one of your constituents, who is quite active in communicating with you. In a very real sense, and he's involved in the hospitality business. A portion of the money he earns in the hospitality business will, in fact, go to subsidize his direct competition for the consumer dollar. I can't imagine a scenario in the world where that's fundamentally fair at any level.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I think your points around the ownership group or on learning from 38 Studios, I think, are all valid. Mm-hmm. And I think at the end of the day, what I'm looking for here is they got to prove their case, right? And I go into this truly from a 0 point, right? I don't go into these hearings from I'd love to see it happen or I hate to see it happen. I'm trying to walk into them as open-minded on either side of the issue as possible and go from there. I think I think many of these situations, you're absolutely right in that there's business cases generally fall or flop on their own. Mm-hmm. There are some limited circumstances, though, and I'll give you a good example of what's been a highly successful program in Massachusetts called MassWorks. And I actually have a piece of legislation that we passed this year, but didn't see through the House, but we'll keep working on that. That it actually models a similar program here in Rhode Island. And essentially what it is it's a program that if there's a large area for commercial development, but for whatever reason, a development, it might be a multi-site development, for instance, and so you might have, 5 or 6 different parcels that have the ability to survive on their own if infrastructure was there, such as utilities and water lines, etc. But any one project can't burden the cost of those utilities. Then what happens is and now what this program is basically doing is that there's been a government entity that's been coming in and saying, okay, we'll run the sewer line to make this project hurdle for all 5 of these business cases, because not one of you could hurdle without it, but we could see it happen, and it then catalyzes, and actually the company returns to the state via an investment that way. versus previously undeveloped, untaxed, unused land was generating nothing versus they now have economic activity. And so I think there are some limited circumstances. I think a lot of the things we've been doing in commerce, right? I mean, let's be honest. A lot of the things we've been doing in commerce have been intentionally devised to be able to make projects hurdle financially. And I use the word hurdle, and I say that as a financial hurdle, right? Investors require a hurdle rate to get capital to attract investment. And one of Rhode Island's perennial problems has been, we have Providence rents, but we have Boston-based construction costs. And it makes projects hurdle. So you see the cranes go up from sky in Boston 10 times a day and none come up to Providence because we can't demand the rent. And you end up in this vicious cycle. And I think, we have to be smart. I don't think we can't be throwing money around. We can't be, making stupid subsidies. We can't be doing any of that. But we do have to be smart and cognizant that there are some investments that if they can be proven in advance, or if the investments from the state do not materialize until after the private sector has done their end of the bargain, that in the end, the business case and there is a positive rate of return to the state works, then we should consider it. And so I think there's it's kind of an economic theory debate a little bit, right?
Right.
And I think just in limited, narrow circumstances, it may make sense. It doesn't all the time, and the Hawthorne Stadium might not, right? But we do, I think, have to be thinking a little bit more broadly and a little more strategically around how do we remake Rhode Island and how that's going to happen, because it's sort of the spiral of death, right? If we don't think about how we reinvigorate new industries, retrain people for new types of jobs, get development working again, we're going to continue the downward spiral of people leaving and companies leaving, and that's not going to help anybody.
No,
and so we really need to be a little outside the box a bit. But to your point, we need to be thinking about it in a way where I can put my head on the pillow at night and say we made a good business decision for the state and for the taxpayers of Rhode Island.
Fair enough. Folks, joining us again via phone is Senator Ryan Pearson, District 19, Democrat of Cumberland and Lincoln. Tony, I'm going to do a highly professional shout out to our production staff here. Tony, how are we looking on time in this hour?
We're about 2 minutes to the top of the hour.
2 minutes to the top of the hour. Senator Pearson, first of all, thank you so much for coming in. I do have one quick shout out in the last couple of minutes we have here. We didn't get to it. I have a feeling you and I could do this for a couple of hours, and I've certainly enjoyed the conversation, and I enjoy the back and forth because it's good conversation. I'm going to make a plea, and I'd like to get back to you on this because it deserves more time than 2 minutes. In this past session, one of the more controversial aspects, both the Senate and the House agreed to, and the governor signed off on legislation that will allow for warrantless searches of the state's prescription medical database. Now, my understanding is, and I'd invite you maybe to write a couple paragraphs that we can put out to our coalition audience. My understanding is that you did not vote on that proposal either way. I'm going to ask you, and since we didn't have a chance, I'm not going to challenge you to it because we didn't have really a chance to debate it, but I'm going to ask you to consider championing legislation to essentially kill that bill, repeal. And here's why. The entire state's medical community is in an uproar. The Rhode Island Medical Association joined Stephen Brown of the American Civil Liberties Union of Rhode Island here just a few short weeks ago. Quite frankly, they were outraged. An invasion of privacy, a clear spiritual violation of the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizure. And again, when you talk about cynicism, the state loves to create databases. A few years ago, in fact, some of the Republicans, Representative Chippendale, if you're out there, no, I'm never going to let you forget this, voted to support a DNA database for seemingly all wonderful reasons. And then, of course, what happens so often in government, my words, not yours, all right, is that government finds a way to push things down further the slippery slope, and so that this information ends up being used for a variety of reasons. Now, both for privacy reasons, for, I'll say, the spiritual support of folks who, in a current generation, have finally moved past the stigma of dealing with mental health as an illness, not as a weakness of character. For the privacy of folks in the medical cannabis program, and for the fact that there was really no proven need to dismiss the necessity of a warrant, because there was no proven by our Attorney General notion that he was being, in those cases when a warrant was was necessary or appropriate, he was not being denied it. So I'm going to ask you, and let's have another conversation on this when we have time, to consider, if you will, rethinking that legislation and saying, maybe we need to take a step back, maybe we need to revisit this because of all the issues that I mentioned. So as a gentleman, can I ask you to consider that?
Absolutely, and I'll just say quickly that we intentionally have a sunset, I believe, in that law. Again, it was driven around trying to make sure we're doing something on the opioid crisis that we don't know about. But I do believe there's a sunset specifically designed for us to make us have to relook at that issue.
All right, let's sunset it soon. Senator Pearson, where can folks, both constituents and folks who live across Rhode Island, where can they find you and your website, and how can they get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is through my General Assembly office. The website, rhodeislandlegislature.gov, has all of my contact information, and that of all the senators in Rhode Island, my office phone number, email, etc., and that is always the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Great. Well, again, thank you very much for coming on. You're a gentleman. I've enjoyed the give and take, and let's keep this conversation going.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.